Howdy everyone! Today I have something super unusual that I found on eBay which turned out to be quite fun. It's a tiny, old school Russian lens which is still mildly popular with some photographers today because it's one of the smallest, cheapest lenses you can buy. The Industar 50-2 50mm f3.5 pancake lens. They are often found in the old M42 camera mount, which you can get adapters for. This is a special one though, which came pre-fitted with a Canon EF lens mount, which I found on eBay for about £30. That seems pretty good value, and it was good to go straight onto my camera. It's basically a Russian copy of a famous old Zeiss Tessar lens, small enough to make your camera a lot more portable. It will work on full-frame and APS-C cameras. The 50mm focal length is a classic standard length on full-frame, neither wide-angle nor telephoto. But on APS-C, 50mm is quite zoomed in, good for picking out your subjects more, or for some portrait photography. The f3.5 maximum aperture means that this lens can let in just over twice as much light as a standard zoomable kit lens, and it also gives you backgrounds which are over twice as out of focus. For example, here's a picture taken at 50mm and f5.6, the same maximum aperture of a standard kit lens. Here's the same photo at f3.5, the maximum aperture of this Industar lens. As you can see, the backgrounds are a bit more out of focus. So the Industar lens does give us some depth of field options. However, it's nothing like as good as a cheap 50mm f1.8 lens, which, as you can see here, gives an even more out of focus background. Anyway, let's look at its build quality and see how it works. It's quite a cool looking little lens made completely out of metal. This is a totally manual lens. Manual focus, manual aperture. The manual aperture ring is on top of the lens and it operates completely smoothly, but not loosely. You can choose any aperture between f3.5 and f16, and there are 7 aperture blades for smoother out-of-focus backgrounds when the aperture is topped down. The aperture ring has hard stops, and when you reach the end, you can accidentally turn the focus ring below, which is annoying. That focus ring does turn very smoothly with just enough resistance and damping to make it quite a pleasure to use. It turns a very long way, over 300 degrees, so you can focus extremely precisely if you want to. And basically, well, that's it. I really like the build quality of this classic little metal lens, although admittedly that aperture ring is a bit fiddly. Let's look at image quality. How on earth will this lens perform on a modern digital SLR camera? Let's start by testing it on a full-frame camera, a 20MP Canon 6D. At f3.5 in the middle of the image, the lens is actually reasonably sharp. Contrast levels are pretty low, but it's quite a usable image. Let's move across the image frame. In the corners, the lens is a bit softer, but it's not too awful. We see some darkness, the effect of heavy vignetting, but I can't spot any chromatic aberration. It's not a strong performance, but neither is it terrible. Let's top the aperture down to f5.6. The lens is a lot brighter and a little sharper in those edges now, with better contrast. In the middle of the image, the lens is nice and sharp, with noticeably better contrast. Stop down to f8, and it's no better in the middle, but the corners of the image look quite good now. The corners are at their best at f11, but things get a bit softer at f16 due to the effect of diffraction. Well, overall, the image quality isn't too bad on full frame. You'll generally need to add a lot of contrast to your pictures, and at f3.5 the corners are not fantastic. But you can draw some decent resolution from this lens, so in a way it's quite usable. Okay, let's challenge the lens with an APS-C camera, a 20MP Canon 70D. At f3.5, the lens is soft in the middle of the image, with that same low contrast. Unfortunately, the corners of the image get even worse, being very soft indeed, but at least there is no visible chromatic aberration. Stop down to f5.6 though, for a little more sharpness and contrast, although the corners are still quite soft. Back in the middle, the image has become reasonably sharp, so that's finally some good news. Stop down to f8 and there's no real difference in the middle of the image, but the corners are becoming more usable. Stop down to f11 or all the way down to f16 for the most usable corners, although they're still not impressive. Overall, the little Industar is a pretty soft lens on an APS-C camera, although if you stop down its aperture, it can become quite sharp in the middle of the image. Let's look at distortion and vignetting on a full-frame camera. The good news is that the lens shows almost no barrel distortion. The bad news is that, at f3.5, we see extremely strong vignetting levels, leaving us with very dark corners. Stop the aperture down to f5.6 and that darkness is chased more into the corners, and at f8 it's virtually gone. Let's look at close-up picture quality. The lens can only focus down to about 65 cm, which is not very close at all, really. However, image quality in the centre is still reasonably sharp at f3.5, and stop down to f5.6 for some nicely sharp close-up pictures. As you can see here, the lens shows quite a lot of complex flaring when bright lights are in the picture, a typical characteristic of older lenses. Finally, let's look at the lens's bokeh, or the quality of its out-of-focus backgrounds. The bokeh really is a mixed bag. In the transitional zones, where the image is only just out of focus, the backgrounds can look a bit busy and messy. However, when your background is more deeply out of focus, the bokeh actually looks quite nice, so it's a bit hit and miss. Overall, if you're looking for an ultra cheap lens for any particular reason, then you could do worse than scouring eBay for one of these old Industar lenses. It looks pretty cool, and it can produce some distinctive and sharpish images, especially on a full-frame camera. But aside from the novelty value, there's no particular reason to buy one. It's just a nice bit of fun.